Thanks, Atif. Just to remind everyone to fire your questions via the question box and we'll take them. We've got some questions that have come in already. We've got the first one. Sorry. Instead of using recruitment agencies, could you hire from the community directly?
The short answer is yes, you can. I think, again, it goes back to the point that I was making, that you have to look at the non-traditional way of recruitment. And by saying that, and I gave some of the example where we in Goldman are connected not only within our community, but outside the community as well. So I think I would highly recommend that you find a way to connect with those communities which are outside of your firm, and using various forums that are available. And then with some sort of create a channel where you can introduce the candidates to your firm, and also some sort of network. I mean, networking is a great way of doing that. You start with informal networking, and through that, find an opportunity where you can connect that. So yes.
Thanks, Atif. I just also wanted to remind everyone, obviously at the start of my talk, you know, I personally work with companies like the Department for Education and New Day to hire diverse talent through events and community activities. So again, please reach out if you are at the start of your journey. Now I've got a question for Atif here. Do they train people how to provide feedback? I heard from women working in research and development that receiving meaningful feedback is critical for promotion and attrition.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I think you were breaking up. I couldn't hear the full question.
Of course, it's, do they train people how to provide feedback? I heard from women working in research and development that giving/receiving meaningful feedback is crucial for promotion and attrition.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think the short answer is yes. And I think it is very important for your team members or hiring managers to go through the training. What sort of feedback? I mean, how to give a feedback. In Goldman, we have extensive training. I mean, the managers go throughout the year. There's a set training and there's a repeater training about how to deliver feedback. Because if feedback is not delivered objectively and correctly, it can go not positive way, rather negative way, because feedback is more of not only just how you give it, how it's perceived as well. So the training of feedback is absolutely important, and I think it would depend on the individual organization as well, what sort of training they will provide. But there are some common training that can be adopted by the firms. But in my experience in Goldman, we absolutely have that. And also in my personal experience, right, I remember when I started first managing people, which was many years ago, I reflected back on how I used to provide feedback versus now I do that. There's a huge difference now, because I'm more thoughtful about and more objective in my feedback, as opposed to being more subjective.
Fantastic. And we've got a next question here. How do you make sure that your working environment and policies do not inadvertently exclude people?
That is a very interesting question. And I think, and again, I mean, this goes beyond my remit of role, because as I said, I'm not a diverse, I'm not in a role of setting up a policy. But I guess you can influence. I think it's, again, where I would suggest is how engaged you are. And in some organization, it is possible, and another organization, it's not possible. But raising your voice and raising your ideas and sharing your ideas. I mean, these days, the companies that I know of, people, friends, or my company, they're very open. I mean, they're listening to the ideas. They want to know what people are thinking about. Remember, and this is my experience, is that no matter how the policy is set up at top level, you need the entire organization's support to be able to push the needle on diversity and inclusion. Therefore, it is fundamental that there is a communication channel open from bottom to up. So I would encourage that you you bilaterally or with some formal channel that is available in your organization to reach out to the people who's setting up the policy. How do you influence them and why you want to do that? It would be, I think the more you have a chance to influence, if you have specific objectives or challenges that you want to address and you want to educate the people who are setting up the policy.
Fantastic. So we've got a request to share the Google report you mentioned. Atif, are you okay to email that to me and I can share it with everyone with the
Sure.
Thank you. So next question, how do you maintain community within Goldman Sachs? What tools do you use?
When you say community, is it the technology community or affinity community? Does the question clarifies that? Or well, I'll assume, let me take an assumption. Let me take an assumption there. So I guess we have to encourage a wide community within our technologists. We have several forums. We have tools like Symphony, which allows us to communicate. We have forums. I mean, I'm part of some of the forums, which, like for example, I'm part of Women in Technology Forum, even though I'm not woman, I'm not female. But I'm interested in that, and then that forum is open for everybody else, and therefore there are other LGBT and others. So these community provide people to come in and discuss ideas and actually create awareness. So I think in the firm, our firm, our Goldman, encourages us to be open about that and create a safe space for people to come in and share their experiences. So I think, yeah, again, in some companies that may be easy to do, and other companies it may require some support from your organization. In terms of specific tools, the tools that I've mentioned, Symphony is a great way for us to connect because our organization is global. So it's not so much that one region, but globally we make sure, and then we share ideas. I speak to a lot of people and actually learn from a lot of people from other regions in Asia, in India, in US, some of the ways that they have adopted, and then bring that back in. So I think if you're interested in, you can leverage that. And then we found, and I personally found Symphony pretty good. We also have tools like internal blogging solutions where we basically use that to interact. Some of the experiences are there where people come in and comment and share that. And I've leveraged them before. So I think those are some of the ones that particularly I have experience of using them.
Fantastic. We've got a question here. All these additional measures sound like a lot of additional work for project and hiring managers. How has this been for you?
Well, that's thanks for asking that question. As I said in the beginning, it's not easy. It takes some time. But once you do that, you do not think that way. Again, it's about training yourself. I remember, as I said, and I realized that we have biases and subconsciously we use our intuition to do that. It's because our mind is trained to do certain things a certain way. So you have to unwind that and then learn new skills as you do with any other skills. But I think being conscious about, that is the first thing I've learned from my managers and my mentors, and also looking at it. And as I said, I was particularly interested and intrigued about this because recognizing the problem, reflecting back to your team and asking yourself your question, do you think your team is diverse? I remember, I consider myself a diverse person in my team when I used to work on 20 odd years ago in the team, and then I worked in different countries. When I first built the team, I built a diverse team, and I go back and I thought it was diverse. And after 5 years, I reflected back. I hope it was diverse in a certain aspect, but not necessarily diverse enough. So you're constantly asking yourself and then training yourself that you need to be objective. You need to focus on your business values, but you also need to make sure what is it that you're trying to do. And then I said, in order to have a team which continuously innovate, bring new ideas, you need fresh perspective. And the only ways you bring a fresh perspective is if you have diversity of thoughts in your team. And so that's constant. So for me, the way I've been doing this is constantly aware myself and setting the bar higher for myself. That what is it that I want to do? What's aspect that I want to, how can I be more inclusive? And again, I think sometimes environment pushes you to that. And I mean, with COVID situation when everybody is working remotely, you do not have that level of interaction physically. You're thinking about how do I make sure that virtually I'm more inclusive. And I give you an example where team meetings, if you're in the physical team meetings, you can conduct, and I'm conscious about, and I've learned from my managers and others, sometimes the loudest person in the room always takes the main focus, but then how do you make sure that others in the team are in the meeting are participating in it? Are they getting an equal chance of that? It's a lot easier when you're in the same room. It's quite hard when you're not. I think the tools like Zoom and Skype and Microsoft Teams and others are helping now, but still it is difficult. Sometimes when you're in the office, you hear some conversation, and then being a manager, you go back and I do, and you correct someone and you say, okay, this is probably not appropriate. Whereas you're not now part of every bilateral conversation, or you're not in that environment where you're overhearing these conversations. But still, you need to be conscious about, you need to keep checking, and I keep checking with my team how they are doing. And if there's anything, the channel is open, so my team feel open about talking to me of any issues. So I think that's how I position myself, and I hope I do. I don't think I have conquered everything, but once you do that, that becomes that's how you think about it.
Thanks, Atif. We've got a controversial question here. I know that everyone has their own opinion on gender quotas and targets, but I'm going to read it out anyway. How much more diverse are your teams now? Do you set goals, for example, percentage of females in technology teams? So I believe this is talking about gender quotas and targets at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can talk about some of them which Goldman has set it, and there's a whole report which I'm happy to share offline and go to them, because I don't want to say numbers which I don't remember correctly. But I can talk about my personal perspective, and in my personal area in remit, what we've been talking about. So let me give you an example. I'll pick up the example that I shared when I was looking at the recruitment for my department. The percentage, and I'll honestly mention that was not great. I mean, one thing we did, and one I wanted to achieve, is how do we increase the percentage ratio between female and male in our division, in our department. So I start tracking, and more specifically, I start tracking more from a graduate level, or year by year, how we are actually improving. And why not? And that's another thing we were trying to identify. And I work with our HR team very closely about that. And I'm happy to say that we moved from very low percentage to 40% or 50% intake. I mean, Goldman, and again, I don't want to incorrectly quote that number. I can go and verify that, but we are in that range between 40 to 50% for our graduate level intake. And I think there's more work to be done in the experience hire and lateral hire. That numbers need improvement. But I think on a graduate level, we basically exclusively put a lot of effort, and it's not just myself, but the rest of the Goldman Sachs team were involved in the HR, the technology managers, and the interviewers to make sure how do we continuously improve that. And we reset the bar as well every year. So I'm quite happy where I see the numbers compared to how they were a few years back. But we can move them higher as well. We aspire to go above and beyond that. This is my personal perspective. I would like it to be 50 or more. But I think it is not fair to put a number out there. I think you basically want to make sure that it is not necessarily a number that we're tracking, but there is a fair perception that is equally that our ratio of whether it's a gender-based or non-gender-based is equally represented.
Fantastic. Another question here. I think we've got another 15 minutes or so questions. To what degree does Goldman Sachs hold its recruitment suppliers to account for delivering on diversity in recruitment? I see a lot of organisations who have diversity criteria in their contracts, but they never monitor progress against them. Thanks, Atif.
Well, thanks for that question. That's another interesting question. A bit hard for me to answer is because I don't necessarily manage the agency relationship, because in Goldman we specifically have teams who do that. But there is but as a part of the recruitment committee, we do challenge those things, and we do, and I know that our teams and HR do review them, and we actually, in some cases, we basically decided not to use those agencies. And again, I think now compared to how it was years ago, it's more data driven. So it's when the agencies supply candidates or pipeline to us, it's not systematic. So one of the things that we do collect the information is also about their diversity information, and again, various aspects of diversity. And then those stats are actually monitored and reviewed, and there is basically a balanced conversation with those agencies as well. So I guess that's kind of approach the firm, as far as I'm aware of, the firm is taking about and more proactively looking at. And I know in some cases where we had, as a manager, I had bilateral relationship with certain agencies. I had a privilege to basically decide which agency, which I feel that I have that providing me the candidate which I'm quite honestly felt that I'm looking for, and if one particular agency was not supplying the candidates that I want, which in this case diverse candidates, they were not necessarily top of my list or getting my attention.
Thanks, Atif. And I'll share this around with the recording, but and a resource that you can use is the Tech Talent Charter. I'm sure everyone's or most people are aware of it. It's basically a pledge for organisations, completely up to them whether they want to pledge to help support the gender pay gap. And recruitment and technology consultancies are actively encouraged to be part of it. I know East Energy are a signatory, and this means that you can look at the data and those organisations and see whether you'd like to work with them if the numbers fit. So I'll share that around and would encourage everyone to pledge on the Tech Talent Charter. So next question, have you looked at stereotype threat and how that can inadvertently be triggered, for example, when trying to recruit more females in tech?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about a specific example, if I can share. Can I ask you to please repeat the question? I just want to make sure that I understood the question correctly.
Of course, sorry, I just need to scroll up with it. We're getting a lot through. Have you looked at stereotype threat and how that can be inadvertently, sorry, I'm messing it up now. Have you looked at stereotype threat and how that can inadvertently be triggered, for example, when trying to recruit more females in tech?
Yeah, sure. Yes, so I think if I understand the question, yes. I think, yes, so it could be, again, I go back to the point that I made. I think it is very important, and I used the example there where I mentioned that I went back to the team in my department where I reached out when I realized that we don't have enough, we're not having success, to be honest, recruiting female engineers or technologists. How could we solve that? So not only I went back to the female engineers in our department, but also wider group, and we discussed, well, honestly, what is it? I mean, and reflected on. We asked every hiring manager, basically in the manager meetings. We discussed that. We brought that in and say, what is it that we want to do? Do we recognize that we have a problem? And if yes, how do we want to address that? And some of it, the working group, the working group was actually suggesting we took that to the hiring managers and then shared with them. And then on the back of it, some of the feedback that came through, we've implemented based on that. So, I think there going to be some forces and opinions, but you have to think about objectively. You have to think about what is it that we're trying to do, and really, and at the point I made, that not only how I feel passionate about it, I need to make sure the rest of my team or my wider department understand that where are the problems, and then why we want to do certain things in a certain way. In this case, particularly increase. Why do we think that there was a problem that we do not have enough female engineers? And I'm talking a few years back. As much as we would like to, and what can we do to change that? And then we've got the support from every level, from top to bottom, and see what we're going to do. And certain things that I've mentioned is that we basically specifically started looking at a number of candidates that are coming in, where candidates we've selected that didn't join, we ask for the feedback. And we've also looked at, reviewed the interviewers, and then so what sort of questions we are asking. We also looked at the panel to really challenge the stereotype, right? And then making sure everyone agrees and understand what collectively we need to do to make progress in that space. And I think some of the challenges, to be honest, is, and I mentioned that there's so much you can do, and one of the challenges that happens that there are not enough female engineers. I mean, that's another fact, and which is what I mentioned in my talk, right? You could do as much as you can in your role, from bringing the engineers in and making sure there's a process and there's a fair process in place. But there are not enough female engineering, and which is collectively as a society, we need to look at it. And I think more recently, the more I look at the number, I think the numbers are getting better, but to a certain level. I mean, if you look at more experience level, the issue, and that's a fact, we cannot hide with that. So that comes back to the training. Like, what are we doing to train the more experienced women, more specifically in the tech industry, and how do we make sure that we are promoting them in a fair way? And so yeah, so what sort of opportunities we have. I'll share another example that I've also noticed, and this is something not just myself, but I think in the firm, talking to a lot of people and senior people, one of the things consciously Goldman basically start looking at that, well, how do we, when we look at the female who are already working, what sort of role we do give them, what sort of projects we give them. I've often noticed, and this is on a reflection, often I've seen in the teams that you would have female engineers, and then you have a bunch of other engineers in the team who are very strong, technical, and then suddenly someone who may not necessarily be very strong technical. And I've noticed a pattern there where basically they would be asked, and this is something one of my female colleagues actually in the office pointed out to me, that the managers tend to point them to the roles which are less technical. So they will become more business analyst or project manager. And again, you may not have thought about it subconsciously, but subconsciously that's happening. So we basically then start making, why? To start challenging it. What is it that, why do we, what sort of opportunities we are giving to them? Why can't we give them more? Why some person's manager is not encouraging more, technical focus, like architect focus into to the female colleagues, and I think that is a very that is not just specific to, let's say, in the team, but it's a more broader challenge as well. I give you another example. I was invited a few years back into head of technology / CIO forum, and there were certain. It was quite a large group. They have multiple things, and then one of the session they had was diversity, and they had. And in that panel, they were all female, and they were talking about obviously challenges and things like that, which was great. One thing I picked up, there was no male person in the panel, so I can understand that, but it could be a perspective from a male colleague as well. But then the follow-up session was more about tech prediction for next 4 years, 5 years, and there was no female in the panel. And that bothered me. And when I looked at the attendees, there were senior female leaders out there. So what I decided, it is not something I do, but it's in the society. Sometimes we have these, I don't know, consciously or subconsciously we make that. But all I did was I decided never to join back them. So they invited me later on, but I decided the organizers probably didn't think about it. We provided the feedback, but I decided not to join them back. So there's certain things I can control, there's certain things we cannot in terms of influencing it. So yeah, those challenges do exist, but I think it is about collectively looking at and be able to influence and change those stereotypes or challenge those stereotypes.
Thanks.
Sorry, it was a long-winded answer, but I hope.
No, not at all. I'm conscious that we've got lots of 10 minutes and questions are still being fired through. So for the next couple of questions, would you mind keeping them short and sweet just to try and get through everyone so it's fair?
Sure.
Perfect. So the next two questions are similar, so I'm going to say them at the same time, hoping that we can answer some more questions. The first one is, tech has 40% attrition of women. A lot of women said it's because a lack of career path for them. How do you track promotion? Do you have incentives? And then the other similar question is, what do you do to ensure that there is diversity in promotions and raises? This is, of course, crucial for retention.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the question. Yes, I think, I mean, I can talk about my personal experience and how we make sure. So when we go through the promotion process, we look at, we want to make sure, I mean, first of all, we want to be fair to our employees and people in our team that work on that. And second of all, we want to make sure that there's an equal representation, that no person, because of certain diversity, is disadvantaged. We look at an individual, we look at their performance throughout the year, and we also look at the representation, and then we look at the forward-looking plan, or we look at the forward-looking impact of that person. So I think in Goldman, and again, as I said in the previously, not just in Goldman, but I know other firms, the senior people, senior female leaders in the organization, across different organizations, representation is not great. And one of the things that consciously, specifically in Goldman we're doing is train the managers to basically look at that. And some of the example I mentioned in terms of what roles, what sort of challenges, what sort of opportunities we're providing equally and fairly to our employees, irrespective of their diverse background. So I think that's what we're conscious about. We basically also conscious about promoting more women in the senior roles, and that has, if you follow that now, I mean, we have now more divisional heads, not more, but compared to how in the past in our firm, and then a more female leaders in different leadership role in the organization. There is a work to be done. I mean, I give you an example. In Goldman, the person who heads up engineering division in Europe is a female, and she's been in the role for quite some time. A very influential and very interesting leader. And I think, and that's where the rest of the, and I think there's more work we need to do, but that we're consciously making sure that not only we have equal representation in our composition of our teams, but also when we talk about promotion as well. And I personally pay quite a lot of attention when we go through the review process, and also when we took up the, and I think it goes back, and I'm touching on the other question as well. It doesn't have to be towards the end of the year when you're promoting it. That thought process needs to be at the beginning when you are finding opportunities, and how we're giving opportunities to our employees. With that comes with training, and also making sure there's the right training available for all of our employees, including female, to be able to get into the respective roles and get the fair chance to be promoted.
I think we'll just take one more question. I do realise that not everyone's questions have been answered today, so I've got my email at the bottom of the screen, so please do get in touch. We'll get your questions answered. So final question for today. You seem to just talk about diversity in silos. How about considering intersectionalities when thinking about diversity?
Yeah, so I think when I talk about diversity, I mean, I'm not necessarily particularly talking about in silos, but I think recognizing issues and problems in certain areas which are more, I would say, visible. But you're actually right. I mean, diversity, and I said that, is not limited to one specific thing. It's quite broad. And it's not limited to gender, it's not limited to sexual orientation or any race. And hence, and I think it's a process, but there are areas where gender one more specifically, the issue is quite acute. And we talked about some of the numbers and representation and some of the questions that have come in. But that doesn't mean that other areas are not important, that we should not focus on. I think myself, or my organization firm, we look at across all of that. It is very important for us to look at, to create, and Goldman more specifically, create a space where anyone and everyone with different diverse background feels safe to come in, be creative, be productive, and have a successful career. That is what our objective, and that's what we're trying to create. And it's a journey, and it's something, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So, and it will take time, and it will take time, but I'm hopeful that we not long, hopefully it won't take that long, but I think soon we will be, not just in Goldman, but across the community in the tech, that we would be able to create an environment and a culture where there is equal representation across all diversity, all spectrum of diversity.
Thank you so much, Atif. I mean, we've been absolutely so lucky with everyone's engagement and questions. Unfortunately, we've not been able to answer them all today. So please do note my email. I realise you can only see half the screen, so I'll send you all an email with the recording, and please do feel free to email me back with additional questions or any way that we can support you, anything like that. Again, a massive thank you to Atif, and apologies about the technical issues. We'll be certainly mention that to GoToWebinar. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, Atif. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Thanks. Bye.